All right, you ready to go, Alex?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, as the title implies, we are dealing with part one here of this series, looking back at some of the early elements that came together to form IU Health, with the values being the lens that we are looking at things. As Alex said, I'm the archivist for IU Health. I've been here since 2018. And I think it's really great that we have kind of the archivist scholar dynamic here, because as specialties, we often work hand in hand to preserve and collect and share and interpret these kind of materials. So when Alex asked me to do this, I went into the collections and picked out some things with an eye to the values of the organizations that came together to form IEL, to kind of give us that springboard, to look at IU Health today. And I thought I would start off with kind of a quick rundown of sort of the mechanics of how IU Health came together, just so we can sort of have that in our minds. It could be sort of a complicated story, depending on how you approach it. But the way I always like to think about it are streams or rivers coming together. And so that's why I picked this image from the Library of Congress, because you have the two rivers coming together to make the one. So one of those rivers would be Methodist Hospital of Indiana. The other river would be the IU School of Medicine, specifically its hospitals, its teaching hospitals, and Riley Hospitals, Riley Hospital for Children, coming together to form the Big Ohio, which would stand in for IU Health, or what became IU Health. And I was born in Pittsburgh, so that's why I'm partial to this image. Instead of using somewhere, like Fort Wayne, which also has three rivers, but I wasn't born there. So yeah, I picked what I knew. So great picture of the point in Pittsburgh around 1910. But we won't talk about any of their hospitals, including the one where I was born. All right, so we can go ahead. So taking this idea of the two rivers into one, I put these graphics together to give us a visual sense of how we got to where we are now. Our deepest roots as an organization go back to 1899. And you can see on the far left at the top, that's where Methodist Hospital comes in, established in 1899 and accepted its first patient in 1908. Just below that, we have the IU School of Medicine stream coming in to the picture, where they opened their first teaching hospital in 1914, Robert W. Long Hospital, which later became University in 1970, I think it was. And those streams coming together in 1997 to form Clarion Health Partners, which went live on January 1st, 1997. So there was a lot of backstory to that, that we don't want to go into here, but a good part of the 1990s were spent getting to that point in 1997, where Clarion Health Partners became a reality. A great deal of consolidation and mergers were happening in the healthcare scene at that time. Very few hospitals wanted to go it alone at that point, and started looking to other hospitals or other healthcare systems to merge or consolidate to lower costs and continue offering superior services where they might not be able to do so alone anymore. And then continuing to the right, Clarion Health Partners then in 2011 rebranded to become IU Health. So same organization, nothing changed in a real substantive way, but I think looking at it from kind of a brand recognition standpoint, the name Clarion wasn't really cutting it after many, many years of kind of having it around and being able to kind of explore how that name resonated with people. And the IU name just seemed to have much greater recognition statewide and even beyond our borders. So that's why it was licensed then to be used by the consolidated entity that had formerly been Clarion. And so moving on to the right, we are IU Health to the present day. The consolidation that created this organization in 1997 was not a one and done kind of thing. It continues on in many different ways and shapes and forms. Like with our physicians group, it's now the IU Health Medical Group, I believe, and before that it was IU Health Physicians. But to get to that point, there were a lot of very disparate doctors and physician groups that had to be melded together to form that overarching organization. And that's just an illustration of how that consolidation process is ongoing. It wasn't completely resolved in that one moment in 1997. There were bits and pieces that had to be kind of from a cultural standpoint and an organizational standpoint continue to be kind of finagled and moved around and worked together. And in a very very large physical sense, that new hospital that's being built not too far from here, that will be the new downtown hospital here in Indy, is a very graphic reminder of how that consolidation continues to advance and change the organization. Because as you can see, we have these still two independent streams here of IU Health Methodist Hospital and IU Health University Hospital that will be joining all of that adult healthcare activity in one place under one roof for the first time. First patient expected in December, basically by the end of 2027. So it's one of those things we've been talking about for a really, really long time. And it's sort of otherworldly to think about it actually happening, but it's happening. So a big change, of course, historically speaking, will be the names of those two entities will go away in that process. So the things that they do and the heritage that they both represent and the people that make them up will all go along into this new entity, but the names will be left. Right?
That's news to me. I didn't realize the Methodist Hospital name was going by the by.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Alex. All right, so I'm going to whipsaw us back and forth in history a little bit. It's just kind of the nature of the beast when you kind of pull objects out of the collection and documents out of the collection. But we touched on that 1899 date. It's kind of our earliest foundational date. And the significance of that is the meeting of the Epworth League, which was the youth organization of the Methodist Church. It's a national organization. It met in Indianapolis in the summer of 1899. I think a comparable thing to think about, to understand that in terms of its significance, is the Super Bowl, that was held here. It was kind of the same level of excitement back in 1899. Was the Epworth League coming to town, and there had been talk about forming a Methodist hospital. The Methodists didn't have a denominational hospital in Indiana at that time. They were going up in many other states and major cities. So it was definitely a thing that was already happening that sort of started to snowball by the late 19th century into the early 20th. So when the Epworth League convention came to an end, they must have been superior budget masters, because they had this $4,750 left over at the end. It's a miracle of cost cutting, I guess.
Fishes and loaves.
What's that?
Fishes and loaves.
Oh, sure,
cost cutting, one of the other. I always have to say.
Right. So the ideas that have been kind of percolating for a little while about forming a Methodist hospital, and these leftover funds came together at the end of this meeting, and the committee, the managing committee, did some brainstorming about what to do with this money that would make the most impact. And they landed on this idea: why don't we use this money as seed money to start fundraising to build a Methodist hospital in Indianapolis, and finally realize that dream. So that was all well and good, but you had to then sell that idea to the North and South Conference of the Methodist Church in Indiana. So next, if you look at the next slide, we can take a little look at how that debate went. So they met in Greencastle a few months after the Epworth League convention came to an end, and they made the pitch. And it came up against this sort of interesting resistance between the new and the old, or the old and the new. Reverend Rollins, he was an older, sort of crusty old Methodist preacher, been around for a long time. And he didn't like this idea of going into debt basically and spending a lot of money. And to him, I think it represented a sort of a watering down maybe of the purpose of the church and what it was supposed to be doing from his perspective. But this young fellow, Reverend George Smith, got up after Reverend Rollins sort of poo-pooed the whole idea. And he just sort of said, well, we can't look at it that way because the church doesn't dare to stop until it encompasses all the interests of Jesus Christ. And we can never encompass all of his interests and leave out the sick. That just wouldn't work. And that carried the day. Everybody thought, it's a great way of putting it. This really makes a lot of sense. We have some starting funds. Let's just give it a try. So the conference voted to go ahead with the idea. And everything really kind of went very quickly in hindsight after that. So starting in the fall of 1899, a board was put together, articles of association were drawn up, and a charter or corporate charter for the hospital was obtained from the state. And after many years of fundraising across the state of Indiana, which was a pretty remarkable thing because it sort of presaged the crowdfunding, that we talk about here. Because while there were some what we would call major gifts today, some heavy hitters in terms of people who could donate money, a lot of the funds that actually built the hospital just came from regular everyday people and little Methodist churches all across the state with their nickels and dimes and sending them off to the fundraising committee. So it was really a joint effort between very wealthy people, but also just a lot of everyday people too. And this was the result, opening in April of 1908, the first unit of the Methodist Hospital of Indiana, right at the corner of Capitol and 16th here in Indianapolis. And there were some nice little facts I was able to find here about kind of where it sat in terms of other hospital construction in the state. And it was the 36th hospital opened in Indiana to that date, which is kind of mind blowing if you think about it. I don't know how many hospitals there are in Indiana now or what the high number might have been, but that idea of a hospital as a place to go was still pretty recent. Before this time, really up until about the late 19th century, hospitals were kind of seen as dark, dingy places where you really went to die. And most people, if they wanted to receive good care, you would have a doctor come to your home. And have that taken care of. So it was a major shift in terms of the place of where healthcare happened. And you can see that was still not exactly in its early years, but was still kind of unfolding in 1908. So that just gives you a perspective of where Methodists fit in all of that. And in terms of denominational hospitals, it was the 9th Protestant hospital in the state. And there were already 13 Catholic hospitals, so they had to catch up. But denominations all across the country were establishing their own hospitals at this time. So the Methodists, the Presbyterians, there was a Presbyterian hospital in Indianapolis, the Deaconess Hospital, that opened a little bit before this. And Catholic hospitals and, of course, Jewish hospitals were also opening as well.
Yeah, I mean, this one thing I'll just maybe interject here on that slide, which is very interesting to me, is to see that this is the 36th hospital. So 35 other hospitals. Now, Indiana's a big place, but Indianapolis is a bigger place. And of course, there already were other hospitals here in Indianapolis.
Right.
Including some hospitals established to treat Black patients because they were not getting care and admission into the other hospitals. So this is part of that historical context, right, that's happening in this time. But also the fact that there are more Catholic hospitals than Protestant hospitals is indicative of why Catholic hospitals were established, which was partly sort of and run by nuns. Which is interesting that the nuns really controlled Catholic healthcare and really seeded these hospitals in places. And the joint motivations, one, to serve largely immigrant Catholic communities in places, but also because Catholic people didn't really feel comfortable going to the main hospitals either. And it was sometimes hard to get admitting privileges for Catholic doctors, which was very much true for Jewish physicians and nurses as well. It's one of the big motivations for founding Jewish hospitals was that admitting privileges weren't given to people who were Jewish. So there's this interesting kind of religious backdrop to, we're going to do this as part of our mission, but also because we don't really feel included in kind of the mainstream dominant Protestant culture, right? Which is very much written through most of these healthcare organizations at this time period. So it's striking to see that there are 9 different Protestant denominational hospitals around the state. And I would imagine covering a wide variety, Presbyterians, Baptists, Lutheran, Methodist, right? These were sort of all involved denominations, but Catholics were a big driving force of this in the time period. So I just thought that might be interesting context.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can definitely come back to some of those concepts too.
Yeah.
And actually that photograph, if we could go back again just really quickly, just sort of a little historical interest. You might not be able to see too well on your screen, but flanking the entrance, there are 2 statues that look fairly spooky in this photo, I think. And I found a little mention in the newspaper when the hospital went up, somebody asking what they were. And the newspaper claimed that they stood for hope and charity, which makes sense from a healthcare perspective. But within 5 years, those statues were gone. You can't find another photo of them being on the building. And I can't find anything in the hospital minutes or any written record anywhere that explains what happened to them. They just vanished.
And charity vanished.
Hope and charity vanished. So if anyone on this call or anyone in this room may have seen these somewhere in somebody's garden or something, please let me know, because it's like they just vanished from the face of the planet. Yeah. In fact, I think this may be the only photo where they show up. So building a little bit off of what David said, I included here from one of the founding documents of Methodist Hospital from its Articles of Association that were accepted in October of 1899, the objects of Methodist Hospital, which gets to values. What did we want this thing to do? What are we trying to achieve? And you can see it's pretty simple. To establish a hospital or hospitals, I think it's interesting they put that in plural, for the treatment of sick, wounded, injured persons, to dispense charity to the poor, and establish and maintain a deaconess's home and other kindred institutions. So it's interesting that they were kind of looking in a more expansive, they think this is going to grow in some way, shape, or form beyond this nucleus we put on the ground here. And you mentioned the nuns being kind of the administrative army, in the Catholic hospitals. A lot of these Methodist deaconesses did the same thing, where they were women who had dedicated their lives to the church. And oftentimes they took an administrative role in the Methodist hospitals. And the first superintendent of Methodist was a Methodist deaconess by the name of Marilla Williams. So she was the one who got the hospital open off the ground and was kind of one of the founding staff members, I guess you could say, at Methodist, that got the doors open, which was a huge lift. And her tenure was not very long at the hospital, maybe a year and a half. And the minutes do have a very interesting little statement in them that when they were looking for her replacement, it had to be a man. So something happened there, that had a gender component, I'm sure. She went on to be a superintendent of a Methodist hospital in Arizona, I think. So she found other work in the same line. Her tenure was not long at Methodist. So this is the original certificate of incorporation. I have it on the table over here as well, if anybody wants to take a look at it. One of our oldest documents that we have in the archives. It is incredibly faded. It's like the Declaration of Independence. You can barely read it anymore. That the printed parts of it are very clear, but everywhere they typed in the pertinent information in it, it's really faded, which lends me to believe somebody had it on display in an office for many, many years with probably the sun beating down on it. But it still exists in the archives. I just wanted to put that in there for interest. So kind of thinking about those early words in the statement of purpose, in the articles of incorporation, I put this in because it starts to speak to the expanding nature of Methodist and its kind of growth as an organization, how those values began to kind of spin out the organization into more and more diverse areas. And the Great Depression of 1929 was a major red alert moment, for everybody, but for Methodist as well. It had quite a lot of debt that it had built up in the expansion of its physical plant. So it's kind of an emergency moment and sort of a time of introspection, I think, and changing sort of the focus of the organization to be different and more expansive and go in different directions to meet that emergency. And this crusade for health and Christian hospitalization was part of that, where included in this was what they call service bonds, which is sort of like an early health insurance that the hospital was offering to whoever could afford it. And so you could buy one of these service bonds and then it would cover your hospitalization. So this was before Methodist joined Blue Cross by about 10 to 15 years, because Methodist was one of the early members of Blue Cross in Indiana, but this preceded it. I think they were just trying to look for a way to kind of broaden that base of assistance that they could offer to people who could afford to kind of pony up, the funds to buy a service bond. But another interesting thing in this is it had a pledge that they had wanted people to sign to go see their primary care physician at least once a year. So there's that notion of preventive health care, trying to lower costs probably, right, by staying ahead of things and staying healthy as opposed to just coming in when you get sick. So that thought process is crystallized in this object as well. And of course, front and center, the famous beacon of health, which became the symbol of Methodist Hospital, symbolizing religion, science, and philanthropy coming together. Again, it's kind of the underpinnings, of the institution. And that was to be a physical reminder for people to see and be reminded of those concepts when they came to the hospital. And it's, of course, still on the roof of the hospital today. It was first lit in 1933.
Look at all these things we can learn from the archives. I had no idea what that was on top of the hospital.
That's what it was for. Yeah. Dr. Benson, who was the superintendent at that time, was an incredible showman. He had run a Methodist church right off of Broadway in New York City. And that church became famous for having a huge neon marquee. I can't remember the exact motto that he had on there, but that kind of summarized the kind of minister he was. He wasn't hesitant to put a big flashy sign on the side of his church if it got people in and it got the message out. He was a superintendent of Methodist Church, Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and he did the same thing. He put a big neon sign on the side of the hospital, and when he came here, this was kind of his equivalent to that. He liked having very flashy, very visual things for people to see and to remember, what it was they were trying to do. Again, that idea of the expanding or evolving purposes of Methodist. These were the revised Articles of Association in 1942. And I had kind of laid eyes on this document once or twice before, but this was the first time I actually read it closely. And in addition to expanding the stated purposes of the hospital, it has a statement in there that they would serve the sick, wounded, and injured people without respect to creed, color, or nationality, to dispense relief and charity to the poor, destitute, and so on and so forth. I didn't know that there had been a call out to color as early as 1942, because the board didn't formally kind of, I guess you could say, desegregate the hospital until the mid 1950s. But this was on the books already by 42, so I found that very interesting. Which makes me wonder if there was, I guess we could just call it a conversation going on or a struggle behind the scenes for quite some time to really commit to that openness and to really serve all. And this is an artifact of that. But you can see here, and thinking about the modern IU Health and things that it does. So a training school for nurses, of course, we don't do that anymore. But Methodist had a training school for nurses until 1968. But of course, continuing education for nurses is a huge part of what we do now. So that remains. But also the training of dietitians, laboratory technicians, and hospital administrators. So that would evolve into the allied health training programs that Methodist had, and that are now part of a health sciences education training that we still do. Training of hospital ministers. We'll see some examples of that later, where clinical pastoral education really increased and became a very large part of what Methodist did, and we still do today.
I also found it interesting in this, as well as one of the earlier slides, that conversation between science and the Methodist tradition or faith in general was integral to formation of the system.
Yeah.
And, now with having the religion and spirituality medicine, scholarly concentration, it reminds me, we're not actually doing anything new. This is actually,
There's some roots to it.
there are some roots to this already.
Yeah. And an emphasis on mind, body, and spirit. The whole patient care, or the whole person, is something that comes up again and again when you look through the archives. So I also wanted to talk about that other stream coming in to make IU Health, with the focus being, of course, on Long Hospital. Some of the values that came along with that. It was the first purpose-built teaching hospital for the School of Medicine. It was a result of a major charitable gift in 1911 from Dr. Robert and Clara Long. So they had quite a lot of real estate holdings in the city. So they basically gave that real estate to the state to sell and then fund the construction of Long Hospital, which opened in 1914. And then Long would evolve into University Hospital. And the charter purpose of Long Hospital, this comes from the trustees of IU. So not only was it, designed to provide proper medicine and care, but there was a charitable focus built into that on the behalf of the wish of the donors. So they wanted it to, it's interesting to say worthy people,
Yes,
not just anyone, but worthy people, whatever that means. But yes, they wanted to have a charitable purpose for the hospital as well, but also to be a place where students from the School of Medicine could learn using hands-on, at the bedside techniques.
I would imagine there were a lot of conversations about worthy people. I mean, social work is taking off at this time too, and there are a lot of discussions.
Yeah.
In as social work is going, who are the deserving poor, and how do you sort of help broadly? Do you work with people and respect cultures of people, but also issues of race and ethnicity are at play here too. So yeah, striking language.
Yes. So leaping ahead quite a bit, but so we can see the values that we sort of traced a little bit on earlier slides. By 1988, Methodist Hospital had these plaques made, and I have a kind of a larger version of this plaque over here on the table that goes into more detail, but the values had been kind of crystallized in these four that you see here. And we can kind of see the presage or the evolution toward the IU Health values and a lot of materials we're going to look at from here. But, compassion jumps out, excellence jumps out, innovation, things that we still recognize today in the current organization. But but also we serve a cause that's greater than ourselves. So the spiritual side, of the hospital business, on the Methodist side is still very much in evidence in the late 1980s. And of course, the beacon. Looking at the IU Medical Center side of things. So of course, the IU Medical Center was composed of Riley Hospital for Children and University Hospital. And these were the shared values as expressed in this nice acronym QUEST. But we can see in this also the values that came forward to that moment when they consolidated with Methodist. Again, excellence jumps out. Quality jumps out. And trust. So these are the through lines that we can see in these objects, reflecting what the values of the organizations were at the time just before consolidation happened. I love this little kit here, right, that I found. So I don't know how many people on the call recognize that black thing there in the middle. That's modern day YouTube right there. But a little VHS tape. So after the formation of Clarion, of course, there was a lot of concern about, okay, we have all these people we've kind of padded together from these two very different organizations. So getting everybody up to speed on what the values, the sort of the combined values were, was a major concern and a major emphasis. The consolidation wouldn't have happened if the two organizations hadn't come together to kind of hammer out a series of shared values. There was a lot of concern on the Methodist side, that those spiritual values would be lost. So they came to the table before they even signed the deal and came up with a series of shared values that worked for both of the combining organizations. And this was one of the kits they put together to help train everybody up basically on what those values were, which of course we still do today in terms of our current values.
Do you know who the training kits went to? Did it only go to administration, or did it trickle down through caregivers and
I think the
service workers and everybody else who makes hospital work? I mean,
Yeah, I think they meant this to what do we say, cascade down, to a very granular level. These were meant for, like unit and department level training sessions and work sessions. There were worksheets in here, to give out to people around a table to fill out. Of course, you all had to gather around a television, and watch the video. But if we go to the next slide, I scanned the little card that was in there because it tells us what those values for the new organization ended up being. And you can kind of harken back to those earlier slides and you can see how they kind of channeled down into the values that were selected to represent the new organization.
I find this slide interesting because in some ways it's more capacious, more inclusive, right, than its predecessors are.
Yeah.
Even the prior Methodist one is a much more stripped down version than this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's this consolidation moment, and it sort of feels like the people on the Methodist side are like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We didn't really mean to go with the skinny value statement. We want to have them all in. And I don't know if there's any evidence in the records of that, but.
I was just gonna say Vern was holding up that he had the plaque that has the lighthouse on it as well, like you have over there in his office.
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, nice, Vern.
There it is.
Yeah, excellent.
Right, but that's a shorter list, I think. Of values,
Well,
right?
over here. I probably should have included this one because while it does have the same sort of abbreviated values, they break them out in more granularity down below.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I think for the short version, they kind of put up by elevators and things like that. They cut all that out. Yeah.
Right.
But the one that really gets my attention, this list is the very last one, the internal community of mutual trust and respect. I think it's maybe the first time team members or employees really are foregrounded in the values, which of course is a major focus today.
Team.
Yeah, team and kind of what was important to people doing the work, kind of on the ground, not just sort of our audience or our patients, but it was kind of everybody getting pulled in.
Right. But I am struck by the two middle ones there, quality of care and respect for life.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to read some of these in light of the Methodist social principles, which is a long-standing denominational document that basically covers any kind of ethical issue you can imagine that the church might have something to say about.
Yeah.
And that has evolved over time,
Yeah.
as has the understanding of respect for life evolved over time in those principles.
Yeah.
But also that line, charity, equality, and justice in healthcare. So in my research with Catholic hospitals, you will see justice and foregrounded fairly regularly as a core value of what healthcare is supposed to be. And so I'm struck to see it here in this list.
So I should also jump in really quickly to say that in terms of intentionality with values, when Clarion was formed, it was formed at the governance level with a vice president role for mission and values, which was important, and also a standing committee for the board to address values. That was very important to make sure that intentionality was there. It wasn't just something we were saying, or actually putting some skin in the game and having an executive dedicated to this, and also a committee to keep this going as an important thing for the organization. This is one of the posters that they made that also kind of like these kits that were sent out all over the organization, to be put up all over the place, just to help keep, the values centered and sort of front and center. And they called it enduring values. So I think that harkens back to, we have two organizations coming together that have their own kind of roots, in values that came together. And then it's a little faded out and hard to see, but of course there's the symbol of the Methodist Church and then the IU symbol there up in the left, symbolizing those two coming together. I wanted to have some chaplaincy and some CPE things. So these this is my edited version. I wanted to make sure to get in here. But I love this cross stitch that's in the collection. At the 1970s, a lot of the departments were encouraged to create patches that represented what they did. So your lab coats and things like that would all have a department designed patch. And this was the one for chaplaincy. And we decoded the symbols on here, where the circle represents unity, health, and wholeness, holiness, and unending love. The Greek letter psi is the symbol of psychology. And of course, the shepherd's staff represents the shepherding attitude within the concepts of healing, comforting, and guiding. And the book is the Word of God. So this was one of the early pamphlets that was put out to advertise the CPE program at Methodist. So this, I think, is from 1968. And I think CPE kind of started formally in the mid 1960s, and was starting to become a pretty large program here by the late 60s. Just the other side of that pamphlet. And then I put this in because I thought it was a really cool graphic, but also the sort of maturing sense of chaplaincy within Methodist Hospital by the 1990s. So Methodist did these healthcare quarterly reports. They kind of veered away from doing an annual report in favor of these. And they featured one of the chaplains, and again, this beacon thing keeps showing up on the cover. And if we look at the next page or the next slide, they talk about both. See that. Chapel's Sybil Glenn, and kind of her role that she played in chaplaincy and how she came to be a chaplain, but also all the things that a chaplain did in terms of not just spiritual care, but just kind of being there to talk with people, and also research in chaplaincy. There's a really cool mention here of the kind of physical healing that having someone to talk to at the bedside can actually have on a person. So you start getting into the research aspect. That Shelley told me about was something that's really growing at this time and building within that space. So, yep, I think that's all that I have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very rich set of slides and an interesting way to approach this history.
Yeah.
Thanks for pulling this all together. I learned a lot from this, including what that lighthouse thing is.
Now you know.
So is that does this hospital continue to stand? Beacon gonna move? I mean, come on, what's inquiring minds want to know what's gonna happen to the Beacon.
Don't have an answer to that.
Have not heard either.
Okay, I mean, I maybe that's one way into sort of an observation about your observations, which is, I mean, one of the things that I find interesting in thinking about mission and values in healthcare is actual physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And buildings. And by buildings, I don't just mean, right, the buildings themselves, but what are they designed to do? And what are the healthcare systems investing in as they build buildings, right? In terms of delivery lines, but also the financing structures and all of this. I did as some of you may know, but others may not know, I did a book project where I did interviews at Catholic and Jewish hospitals around the country. And people talk about their mission and values, and it always sounds really great, because they have these anecdotes and stories. And I'm sort of like, well, but how can I tell how you're living out your values really? And I found that asking people, well, what are you investing in right now? What are you building right now? Like, what were your top priorities in the budget last year? That's where the mission and values become concrete and realized and expressed, right? And so I was struck by hope and glory disappearing from the building.
Hope and charity.
Hope and charity. Sorry, I said glory. Thank you for correcting me. Right? But hope and charity disappearing from the building.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an intentional public-facing decision.
Yeah.
That reflects a lot of behind the scenes conversations. This was something that you mentioned too, sort of you mentioned that Methodists didn't desegregate until sometime into the 1950s,
right?
Despite that clear statement
42.
in 42.
Yeah, it was always kind of a wishy-washy thing. It was just never quite clear, what the stance was,
right,
to the people outside. Yeah.
I mean, so one of the things I find interesting is like, it's the conversations around mission and values that actually give them meaning. So I love that you all are doing this. And I wonder, will there be like a background list of mission and values available to people? Or will you sit down and talk about purpose, excellence, compassion, and team, which I believe are the current values? There's just so much richness there that you've kind of unearthed in some way. So I don't know how you're thinking about doing this in terms of thinking about mission and values, and whether you'd have some of Alan's artifacts available around the table. I think that'd be very enriching historically.
Saw Vern had raised his hand as well.
Yeah, quickly, because I've got to run to another meeting. What I was told about the Beacon is that actually the roots of the Beacon are from Mrs. Lilly going to London and seeing the Beacon at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and coming back to Indianapolis and saying there will be a Beacon on top of Methodist Hospital. So I don't know if that's lore or accurate, but and there at one point I was told that there would be a modernized Beacon, but on the new hospital, but I don't know if that still holds true or not. So
hi, this is Leah Gunning Francis. Alan, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I just do want to confirm that at this time, there will not likely be a different type of beacon on the top of the downtown hospital. Uh, there are other ways that are being explored as to how we celebrate what the beacon represents and how we represent that well at the hospital. But I do just want to confirm that the existing beacon will not be transferred on top of the new hospital. I don't want that, that to be, but just know that there are works in process to consider how there could be some place on the new campus, some type of representation of what the beacon means so much to the history and current state of Methodist Hospital. Thanks.
Thanks, Leah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to respond to your prompting as well, David, I think that understanding our history and retelling the story, even verbally, like we're doing right now, is part of the way that we keep the energies from those roots. And I do wonder if we risk losing some of those energies. And I think of it as like the theological language that came into the early documents.
Yeah.
How do we retain that? Not only as the merger brought together religious and non-religious, but also recognizing that we are spiritually diverse.
Yeah.
And so I think that conversation is something that the Evans Center is all about and that I'm really passionate about. Here was an interesting story I'll share, which was a few years ago, and I vividly remember it because it was the meeting when Kevin Armstrong said he was retiring from being the Mission Values Officer. And he'd invited me to speak with, it was also where I met Amy Martin the first time. Amy Martin and I were going to meet with him and 5 other Mission Values officers from the 6 Methodist hospital systems country. And they asked me to talk about how does the Evans Center address the mission of the Methodist Church, which is very distinct from saying what is the Evans Center mission and vision within a spiritually diverse setting. It was how does it meet the mission of the Methodist Church. And I had just come back from Duke Divinity School from a 1-year theology, medicine, and culture certificate program. And so I simply shared, I believe the way that you can see this theologically grounded is in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where we're called to look outside of our faith tradition to essentially the outsider, to see the goodness in that person and then imitate. And there's a kind of a back and forth in that. And so I think that speaks to the spiritual diversity, but also to that ability to be rooted according to a center. And then we all bring our own root systems, of course, into the team. But yeah, I'm interested because I know you did some work.
I mean, I'll share an anecdote sort of along these lines. I was conducting interviews at a Catholic healthcare system, and one of the people I interviewed was a Jewish physician who saw a need and founded a federally qualified health center near one of their hospital systems to provide care, sort of more primary oriented, regular care through an FQHC that was outside of what the hospital was doing, but he just felt it was necessary and he kind of drove for it. He said, as a Jewish person, it feels a little weird to be in these Catholic spaces when we start with every session with a reflection and prayer. But you know what? I'm completely down with the social justice mission. And I consider this clinic to be a finger in the dike of a very leaky healthcare system. Do I want the system to change? I do. But I feel like this is a way that I can express my Jewish commitments to providing the care that I think is necessary for this, fairly hard-hit community. that's adjacent to a smaller hospital in this big system, right? So this is his effort to do that. And often, I have oftentimes found that people from different faiths oftentimes appreciate sort of trying to parse this language, so long as it's not, rigid in its formulation. But I mean, I'm struck by this language that you used earlier, or maybe it was the response to the I think it was Smith's response to Rawlins, if I remember the names right.
Yeah.
We need to. The Methodist Church shouldn't stop until it encompasses all of Jesus Christ's interests,
Right.
including care for the sick, right? Including charity. Care for the sick, charity. Well, how does that root in different religious traditions? It does, right? You can find religious roots for caring for the sick, right? Thinking about charity and lots of different religious traditions. So I think sometimes, and this has been characteristic of Protestant hospitals, is they've been more willing to go with neutral language. And they're the least talking about mission and values compared to Catholic and Jewish hospitals, which have been a little bit more intentional about holding on to some of their more tradition-specific language. So it's really fascinating to compare across. This is one of the reasons why there are not that many Protestant hospitals that are strongly affiliated anymore, because they haven't maybe felt the necessity to sort of lean into their tradition over against the dominant culture, right? But we're part of the dominant culture and therefore could just sort of assume those mission that, those values would be in place. So maybe that's some interesting contextualizing about it. Again, when I talk to people, a lot of people like the particularity of language as a way of opening up the deeper conversation, as opposed to sort of more bland general. Put it that way.
I remember one of the stories you told in your book, which I recommend to anybody who hasn't read it, Healthcare as a Social Good.
I started reading.
Okay.
David Craig. You wrote about some of the theological language that was used, I think, in Massachusetts.
Yep, that's right.
During healthcare.
Yes, right.
And I wonder if we sometimes lose the richness of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a theological energy. And how can we retain that?
Yeah, and just to put that into a little bit more concrete form for people who are listening in, there was an organization called the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which is still very active. At the time, it was really a combination of Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish groups, though it's broadened much more now. I know Muslim groups are involved. I don't know how much wider than beyond that, but they were very active in trying to pass what became the basis of the Affordable Care Act in Massachusetts. And then they created this, what I call a public liturgy. So they used this public radio station's health bulletin. And their leader, Herman Hamilton, would quote from scripture from either the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament, and then he would talk about a policy related to healthcare implementation. So, and it was amazing that he would sort of connect these scriptural passages to healthcare policy. What does it mean to be affordable? And so he quotes from the parable of the widow's mite, the widow who puts in a little tiny bit where everybody else is putting in a lot more. And he says, well, we accept the individual mandate. Everybody's going to put in a little bit, but that means the community needs to give much more. And they were able to influence much more sort of generous affordability standards and much higher subsidies as a result of this. So they really leaned into that kind of theological language rooted in religious text even, and then kind of reflected on, just policy. So it could be done. It takes a kind of a creative wordsmith, maybe like Reverend Herman Hamilton, to pull it off in a way that, that makes it work. But there's certainly nice examples of that.
Thank you so much both for coming. I know we're at time. And so I'll let Shelley just give one or two announcements for next time. And then this will be recorded. This has been recorded. We're going to make it available on the website as well. Because I know there were many people who wanted to come that weren't able to. So thank you so much.
That's been great.
Yes,
Yeah, thank
thank
you.
you for coming. So our next Evans Center meeting will be on August 3rd at noon. It will have this hybrid option as well. We will be hearing from one of our values grant recipients about their projects, and Jay Foster will be helping co-lead that conversation. And we're so grateful to Jay that he will join us on his last day as an employee at IU Health to talk about some of the projects that he's been influential in helping shape. So I hope that you'll join us on August 3rd in person or online. Thanks so much to our online participants as well. Leah, we especially appreciate your insights and sharing and helping us know what's coming next. Thank you, everyone.
More soon, friends.